Well, thank you, Stefano. And I must say that as a person who grew up on a farm in eastern Colorado in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains, whose family owned a property in the mountains which had beavers and a beaver dam, I had never thought about the families as beavers, but I will never be able to see those beavers again in the same way after your talk. So thank you very much. All right, we are now ready for 15 minutes of discussion, and I've already had Virgilio, and I've got Rocco, and yes.
Thank you, Stefano, for a very inspiring presentation. I have two questions. One is about communications. Your talk is about public policies, and what is the audience of the findings of this very rich plenary session? Whom should we send the message to? That's question number one. Question number two is how can we reach this audience? I think we, in a way, we're mature to make sort of policy recommendations, as you mentioned, like flexible work hours. There were other papers that have mentioned a couple of suggestions. Are we in a position to make these recommendations, and if so, how can we make those recommendations? And the same goes for the business community. You talked about the corporate family responsibility. So how can we reach to the business world to encourage that to happen? The second question is about policy making. I have had a chance of being state secretary for 5 years in my previous life. And I see the family agenda having a right-wing connotation that leave a part of the political spectrum not in favor of that. And I was talking to Alan about that over lunch. So we need to find a way of crossing these partisan lines so that it becomes not a part of the political spectrum, but rather something that the society as a whole can embrace. So my question to you is, how can we make that bridge? Because the left, and here I'm using very general categories of left and right, but the left is more focused usually on the poverty issues, but are exactly the poor families that require the most. But they're not so willing to engage in family as a main objective as the more conservative part of the political spectrum. So my question is, how can we bridge this political divide and create more of a consensus that could generate policies that bring together different political parties?
No, thank you, Virgilio. Oh, the two questions are very relevant. What is the audience? Well, as you know, it's in the practice of our academy to spread the final statement, about which at the end in the general discussion, there will be a proposal by the organizer of this session, Professor Donati, and we will have a publication which will take the time which you can imagine. And in general, the publications of the academies, they circulate quite a lot. So that is to answer partly to your question. But I understand that that is not enough. What I perceive, just because I have, for different reasons, the possibility of interacting with business managers, etc., that among the CEO, not in general, but a minority proportion, they are aware of this problem. And in fact, the notion of corporate family responsibility came from them, not from other side. The other side, they talked about corporate social responsibility. And now, if that is done because they found it in their own interest or because they believe, that is a different matter and nobody can say. But the fact is that nowadays the organization of work goes in this. Take the so-called smart work problem. We are still far away, in my opinion, from having a ready model of application of smart work, because the smart work has pros but also cons, as we know. But that is already a way to consider that today the firms, in particular the big corporations, realize that unless you take the family, not only the individual worker living in a family, into consideration, there is no future. And perhaps, in general, everybody, the various associations, they should, in my opinion, strive in this direction. The second question is, yes, you are right. So far, family issues have been monopolized or colonized by the right-wing spectrum. But the fault is whom? Of the other ones who accepted that? Stupidity is stupidity. When, yes, because you see, those who are on the left now are changing. But they were considering the family. You know what Karl Marx wrote about the family. That is obvious. Go and read Das Kapital. When he says we have to destroy the family, he wrote, because the family is an engine in the typical of the capitalistic way of exploitation, etc. And he said it's exploitation inside the families and outside, etc. So it is obvious that when people have this ideological approach, the result is that the family issues have been taken instrumentally by the right wing. And that is, in my opinion, makes no sense at all, because the right wing uses the family instrumentally, not because they believe. And there is a lot of empirical evidence to that. But again, it seems to me that something can be done if proper ideas are spread. Okay?
And Vincenzo.
Thank you, Stefano. Powerful and inspiring, even more than usual. Two questions. The first one, policies in favor of the poor, public policies in favor of the poor, happen to be sometimes, or rather often, policies against the family, because the state considers as interlocutor of the policies not the family, but the individual. I give you one example. If I happen to divorce my wife, the state is paying a significant part of the costs of divorce, because I shall take out of my income the part of my income that I give to my wife to support her and our children, who usually stay with her. Didn't I support them when we were not divorced? Why should I pay more taxes if I keep my family united rather than when my family is divorced? It's only one example, a significant one, by the way. We live in a world in which we have different models of family. In the long run, we suppose that the model that produces better results will be the dominating model. The family has been disassembled, but it may be reassembled. But here, in this competition, the state makes an intervention and supports and finances alternative lifestyles, whilst the, let us say, traditional family lifestyle has to pay for them. Why? The second observation, regards beavers. I think this lecture will remain in our memory as the beavers lecture. Beavers produce positive externalities. The family produces positive externalities. We have learned to consider negative externalities, and we have a certain instrumentary to take in account the negative externalities and to make the company pay for the negative externalities. But we do not consider positive externalities. I give you again one example. I have 4 daughters. They pay taxes in order to finance the pension system. The pension system will pay my pension and will pay the pension of a lot of people who did not have any children and who had a disposable income much higher than mine because they had not to support their children. Why comes that? Is it correct? Is it right? A third observation, this is not so much a question, but rather an observation. Left, right. In Italy, we have a peculiar experience. We have had a tremendous mobilization of families, twice. And it resulted in nothing. Nothing. Because we did not have the political intelligence to channel it in a kind of non-partisan but serious political pressure. The leadership of this enormous family movement has been left, the movement has been left without real leadership. And that's a problem that perhaps answers in part the question that had been posed before. Thank you.
Let me have Vincenzo add his question, and then I'll let you answer both, because I want to make sure we can get this in.
Oh, thank you, Professor Zamagni. 2 considerations. The first one, do you think that the economical values of the family is not considered within the general accounting system because of utilitarianism thought? This is the first question. Because maybe in the before the utilitarianism thought, maybe the family had a function, and the family was considered as a private body with public relevance. But this is just a question. The second, I agree, of course, with everything. And just to understand that now we are living a changement of epoch, and maybe we can convince that if in the past it could be, we could understand that the family was at the end was just a consumer because we lived in a normal economic growth, but now this economic growth is not so usual, and we have to reconsider the family as an investment, because we have to see the family not only at the end of the production, but before the production. I know that these words are very tough, but just to give everybody the idea that without families and the capacity, the human capital accrued in the family, we cannot have also any production. In this way, we can also convince that the family has an economical role and produce economic value. Thank you.
Rocco, you are right. It is a major confusion of thought is due to the fact that we keep on confusing policies against poverty with policies favoring the family. But they are not the same thing. That is why I always propose to talk about the policies of the family, not for the family. Because if you talk about for the family, you consider the family as an object of public benevolence or private philanthropy. But if you talk about the family or policies of families, you are brought to consider the family as a subject. It's an agency which should play an important role. In other words, in our society, more or less, families are considered as under the subspecie, Latin would say, povertatis. But that is a conceptual mistake. And in fact, when you have provisions of different type, you say, oh, family who are, relatively speaking, well off, they are cut off, which is a sign that under the name of family policy, we mean policies against poverty. Of course, policies against poverty must have the priority. That is obvious, but should not be confused with the others. And when you said why positive externalities are not exactly for the reason I mentioned before. Because the family is considered a consumer unit. The notion of externality belongs to the productive side, not to the consumer side. If I am a consumer, what does it mean that I generate positive externality? It makes no sense. That is why that unless at the level of United Nations, because there is a special commission of United Nations, which are supposed to implement the new rule of national accounting. Because these new rules never existed before the post-war period. We cannot adapt it. Because the very moment that we consider the family as, and so I also answer to Vincenzo, why nobody talks of investment? Of course, because a consumer does not make an investment, because consumption is the opposite of investment. Only producers invest. So it's a conceptual problem, which has major practical impacts as we are seeing. Finally, what you said, Vincenzo, about utilitarianism, that is a long story. You know, utilitarianism was born Bentham, 1789, England. But that is not completely true, because the principle of utility was introduced, you know by whom? By Cesare Beccaria in Milan. Cesare Beccaria was a Protestant, Calvinist. And if you read the book by Bentham, he quotes Beccaria at the beginning, the first page, he said, I am very thankful to Cesare Beccaria because he made me understand the principle of utility. That is important. Few people know these things, because Bentham has its own responsibility. But after all, he took it because Beccaria was a banker. And so now, what is the point? The point is that, as you know, after the death of Adam Smith was against utility, but he passed away too early, passed away in 1790. After his death, utilitarianism entered economics. And since then, never. Now it's on demise. I would say only perhaps 65, 70% of the economists all over the world are utilitarian. But until when I was a student, 95% were utilitarian. Because at the beginning, utilitarianism is convincing. What's wrong with maximizing utility? Why today is in demise? Because of the happiness paradox. Jeff Sachs knows highly well when they said utility is different from happiness. Because utility, which does not mean that it's a bad word, but it's a property of the relation between a person and a thing. Happiness is the property of the relation between a person and another person. That is why Aristotle wrote, you cannot be happy alone. It takes at least two to be happy, at least two to be happy. And so the fact that nowadays utilitarianism is going down is exactly a reflection of the fact that people want to be happy, and they realize that this is. Thank you.
But there will be time in the general discussion. So I've got Judah, and we also have Elizabeth Schultz online, so we'll pick up with her on the general discussion.